Welcome to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where, like Kevin Burkhardt, we did our hair real nice for Tom Brady's debut on Fox. We have a mega NFL Week 1 media review to get to. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That is Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Ben, football's here. How are you feeling? It's that time of year.
I'm feeling great. And for those who are just listening and not watching on YouTube, we actually did do our hair. Like this is
Kind of
usually
did.
we're
I
in a
think we
ball
were both
cap.
hats last week. This time, the hats are gone. We got our Kevin Burkhardt hair going for sure.
Yeah, that's how you know it's football season. That's how you know we mean business.
I feel like hats actually would probably be more like
Yeah.
football if we were really in that like tailgate mode. But yeah, I got my first Cardinals home game. My family has season tickets on September 22nd, week 3, I think. So I'll be really in the zone by then, but this was a nice little taste. We got a great weekend of games, and we have approximately 400 new people to talk about in this media world, including two New England Patriots legends who we will deep dive on. Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, different networks, somewhat of the same perspective. We'll get into that and some highlights and lowlights from the rest of the weekend with some new faces at CBS and Fox and Peacock and ESPN and everywhere else. Okay. You wrote about this for the website, Ben. Tom Brady, the story we've been talking about for 2 years, making his debut alongside the previously mentioned Kevin Burkhardt and Aaron Andrews in the number 1 booth for Fox, America's Game of the Week. It's Dallas Cowboys, of course, and they were visiting your Cleveland Browns. So a little bit of some home cooking going on here from you as well. But what did you think of Brady's first ever game? How harsh are you willing to be for the rookie broadcaster / NFL GOAT?
It was fine. It was okay. If this was the third or fourth game on a college football slate, like you would not have noticed anything that went terribly wrong in the broadcast. I there were no major blunders. There was a moment where he stumbled over Jeremiah Owusu Koromoa's name, the Browns linebacker, and he said "excuse me," which based on social media led a lot of people to think that he had burped on air. But as somebody who has become accustomed to spelling Owusu Koromoa on a regular basis, I can assure you he just stumbled over his name. But that's not what Fox is paying for, right? Fox is not paying and $75 million for just okay and just fine. These are lofty expectations. In my review for Awful Announcing, the analogy I used was actually Tom Brady's first start with the New England Patriots back in 2001, in which he was a game manager. He went 12 for 18 for 164 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, and the Patriots won like 41-14. And to me, this was a very game manager like performance. I thought, that you could definitely pick apart some stuff. Like I thought his cadence was very slow and very enunciated early on.
Yeah.
That was my attempt at repeating it, and I can't bring myself to speak that slowly even. I thought he sounded very rehearsed, which I think you would expect from somebody in that position. But all things considered, like Kevin Burkhardt was the real quarterback here, and I thought he put Tom Brady largely in good positions, asking him questions. But I think it's just going to be so hard to beat the quarterback out of Tom Brady. Like, I think Tom Brady is a quarterback. Quarterbacks are accustomed to not saying anything controversial and not saying anything that's going to make an unnecessary headline or unnecessary distraction. And that's fine when you are the quarterback of the New England Patriots or Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's not as fine when you are the number 1 NFL analyst for Fox. So obviously it's game 1. Obviously he still has at least 17 more of these to go, plus the playoffs. So I think, based on his work ethic, he should only get better. But I thought it was solid, but not spectacular in any fashion. What did you think?
There was this question all summer, right, of like, how harsh are we allowed to be? And I kind of just posed it to you there because $37.5 million, 10 years, demoting Greg Olsen, all the things that went into this move on the part of Fox. Obviously, the departure of Aikman and Buck, even that we've kind of already forgot about being part of this whole deal. And I actually think that even though we all ramped ourselves up to think of this as this massive moment in sports history, frankly, even let alone sports media history, I think people are kind of dealing with this with kid gloves a little bit. In terms of the national voices that I have heard talk about it, I think that there's this there's this hope or optimism that it's like, oh, come on, like it's his first one. He got better as a quarterback. He'll get better in the booth. He's kind of has no experience even compared to a lot of other people who have made this jump. He hasn't even done a podcast. He did the radio show last year with Jim Gray. Who cares? You know, I just think normally when a broadcaster is great right away, especially an analyst, we do know it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
We do, like I was thinking of people like Dan Orlovsky and Greg Olsen, who obviously was his predecessor in the top Fox booth, and even Robert Griffin, who we do kind of have an Aqib Talib once upon a time, who unceremoniously had to exit because of some, stuff off the field, we'll call it. Like we hear about these people when they first come in, and we know right away, wow, that's different, that's new, that's very fun. And so the fact that Brady couldn't even get to a threshold for us to all have that feeling deep down in our stomachs about, what the future might hold, it does kind of worry me. And I was pretty bummed out because I had pretty high hopes. I thought the interviews he's been giving and just letting loose a little bit more on the herd and wherever else, the Fanatics conversation with Stephen A. Smith that we talked about a little while ago, maybe on our first episode. I think this does spell a little bit of trouble here, that maybe the ceiling of what Brady could be, we might have to ratchet that down a little bit. It might not be the vaulted ceilings. It might be a normal, everyday person's kind of home, 10 feet or something. I think that's where we are. I think this does spell a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, to your point about Greg Olsen, like I knew he had it when he was calling XFL games. Like you could just tell he viewed the game in a manner that was different than the other analysts who are up there. I will defend him on this, and I'll push back. One, I think it's like the hardest job in sports media of these football roles we're going to talk about, from being a guest analyst like Bill Belichick or being a studio analyst like Jason Kelce. Like, I think being in the booth and calling a live game where you can only prepare so much for what's going to happen, I think that's a tough job. And I think that, having said all that, like, this is the position he's in. There's no kid gloves. He's the number one analyst for Fox, and he's going to have to adjust quickly. The other thing is, Tom Brady's not in the booth because of his personality. Tom Brady's in the booth because of his resume and because of his star power. And I think there's almost some push and pull with that, where it's a little distracting to have Tom Brady in the booth. Like, you're hanging on to every word. You're hearing this voice that you've been listening to in a different context for more than 20 years now. I don't know, just as somebody, maybe it's because I was tuned into the game to not only watch it, but to pay attention to what he was saying. But I found there something to be distracting about Tom Brady being in the booth. And the other thing I would say is, this goes to head coaching too. Like, there's something about the idea that the best analysts and the best head coaches aren't typically former star players. Now, obviously, there are exceptions, but by and large, like, the best head coaches in basketball are backup point guards or role players, and the best head coaches in football are backup quarterbacks or guys who were, gritty special teamers or whatever. Like, and that's because you take Barry Bonds and you make him a hitting coach. Barry Bonds can't necessarily articulate what makes a great hitter. Barry Bonds just knows how to, right. Just go be Barry Bonds. Just It's Shaq's analysis. Go be Shaq. Like, and Tom Brady, like, Tony Romo doesn't have the same resume as Tom Brady, but I think he's kind of the exception, at least early on. And he's
a great example of exactly what I was talking about too. We knew it immediately, right?
Exactly. And so I think that, like, Tom Brady, I just didn't get that sense that he's going to be able to articulate the game through his prism, because his prism is so clouded by being the greatest of all time. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves, if it does evolve moving forward.
So my other thought on this is, and it's again goes into our expectations. What did we really think was going to happen here? And your points there, as far as like the history of who actually has been the best, and maybe where we should have put the benchmark for him is valid too. But I think Fox just kind of let him down, to be honest with you. I think that giving him the payday that they did, putting together, there was this commercial on Saturday during college football, may have aired even before that. We caught it on Awful Announcing on Saturday and wrote it up in a post. And it's, the kind of angel and devil on his shoulder kind of thing, but it's like Patriots Brady and Bucks Brady and whatever kind of talking to him, and he's answering, oh, here's why I'm doing this. I'm going to be the best, just like I was as a QB and all that. And the cowherd appearances and just this red carpet. Of course, you have to do it, but they also, like, again, to go back to some of these other debuts, we got to just, like you're saying, oh, hold on, I'm watching the XFL, and is that the Panthers tight end? What is he? Why? Oh, wow, he's pretty good at that. You know what I mean? Or is that guy who ran out of the back of the end zone? Why is he like awesome on my TV right now? You know what I mean? And instead, it was just, and then also to have the demotion of Olsen go into it, it sets, hey, this guy is like every sports media nerd's favorite analyst. Go be better than him. Otherwise, you're a failure. It's just a lot of, I think, ingredients that add up to probably too lofty of expectations. But you mentioned him being a quarterback. When I think about Brady, if he can get better, as he does get better, which I think will happen, it's just a matter of how much is. I personally, and this is just, we're getting into pure taste here, but I love something that I think Olsen does very, very well. Something that I think like Jeff Van Gundy does very well on the NBA, or did very well on the NBA. The best broadcasters do, and it can be a little bit of a crutch if you're zeroed in on it, is take me through what it feels like to be not the deepest of reading the safety, but oh, they only have 8 seconds here to get this off. Watch how that player communicates the call. Like the nuts and bolts of the flow of a football game. I think nobody on earth is more equipped to talk about that stuff than Brady. And I felt like it was almost absent. He was going too big picture. I love when it's like Olsen saying, oh, did you just see the tight end look at the QB? He doesn't know what the block is going to be. And then the pass rusher bum rushes the quarterback, blows through that tight end and gets a sack. The little things are what we don't notice. We notice when, yeah, the Browns are going backward too much. We notice that. We don't need anybody to tell us that. What we don't know is that other stuff. And that's where I think he could honestly improve by thinking less and just saying what he's seeing, saying what he's feeling in those moments. And I'm sure there'll be some awesome touches that can come from just what would be in your head if you were on the field right now at the most microscopic level. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot if he can just tap into that a little bit more.
And to that point, it was a very weird game, and maybe not even weird. It was just a blowout. Like, it was not a competitive game. There wasn't a competitive moment in that game from the second quarter on. And when you think of Tom Brady, like, you think of big drives, you think of big moments. You don't think of week one blowouts where the fans are booing the home team off the field. And that's exactly what we got in Cleveland on Sunday. So I did think we saw Tom get more comfortable as the game went on. But that also might have just been like a matter of, hey, I don't really have to focus on this game. I can kind of just shoot the shit with Kevin Burkhardt right now. But I do think to that point, though, like you mentioned, being a quarterback, like Deshaun Watson was really bad. Like that, and that was one of the biggest storylines of week one of the NFL season, is how bad Deshaun Watson looked. And we saw more of Tom Brady making excuses and justifying his play than we saw of him maybe not even being critical, although he wasn't very critical, but even explaining like, man, this footwork looks really off, or this is what Deshaun Watson isn't seeing out there, or this is what he needs to improve on. It just seemed like it was a very, and to that end, even Dak Prescott didn't particularly play well in that game, even though he didn't really need to for the Cowboys to win it. So I don't know. I was expecting more of a quarterback centric focus for Tom Brady in that game. But to your larger point about him being put in a place where he's replacing Greg Olsen, I just think Tom Brady's such a weird fit in the booth. Like I just don't. This feels like it's the Murdoch's shiny new toy, and this is the highest profile position they could put him in, calling the Super Bowl. And like I think there are just better uses of Tom Brady, even if you still want to pay him $375 million. You could put him on Fox NFL Sunday's pregame show. You could do a weekly feature where he sits down with a quarterback each week. Like I don't know. Are that many people going to be tuning in to watch the Super Bowl because Tom Brady's on the call and not Greg Olsen? Like, I just think it's a weird fit with very little upside and really a lot of downside in terms of Tom Brady's reputation and Fox's reputation in terms of broadcasting NFL games.
Yeah, it doesn't make a ton of sense, right? Like we are going to talk about Belichick next, and the thing about him is it kind of does fit ESPN's overall strategy, like bringing in, even if it's just for one season, which this might be, a legend on the court or as a coach to cover any sport just to fill in on a studio show. That's an ESPN strategy we've seen, but there was a feature about the process of getting Brady to Fox at the Ringer by Brian Curtis this week or last week now, where Curtis talked about how this isn't actually how Fox normally has operated, right? People like Joel Klatt, people like Kevin Burkhardt, Joe Davis, they were not names, and Fox and their own, obviously, talent made them names with the platform that they were given. So it is just a little confusing from every angle. I do think it will get better. I do think that are going to be people for the beginning of the season who tune in just to maybe they're going to pick this game over the other one on CBS or something more often than not. I mean, it's probably pretty minor. It's not going to affect the ratings a ton. We didn't see it do that much this weekend. But that will fade if that improvement doesn't come. And if he continues to feel like he did back in 2000, 2001, when he was a game manager getting 175 yards in the air and, letting the defense take it home. That's not going to work out. That, like you said, is much more of a fourth ESPN college football broadcast on a Saturday type of broadcaster, not record setting salary, Hall of Famer, most famous football player probably of our lifetimes. It's not gonna work. To prove them right, he has to get better, I think.
So real quick before we move on to Belichick, because I do want to talk about him. I can't remember if it was our test episode or our first episode, but I said I think Tom Brady is one and done. Like that's my take, that's my baseline expectation. I think we should keep a running tally here throughout the season. I still think he's one and done. What say you?
I kind of think the same for him and Belichick. So yeah, I especially if he doesn't get the love and adoration that maybe he was expecting or hoping for here, Brady, I think he might just realize what we all are already thinking, which is what that weird slash kind of cool Fox commercial showed of like, why are you doing this, dude? I
Yeah.
wonder if he has an answer to that. And if he doesn't get his answer, then he might just decide, hey, actually, I'm not going to.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. All right, let's spin this forward. I wrote the review on Tom Brady. You wrote the review on Bill Belichick. My review was a little easier because I only had to cover one football game. You had to cover 37 podcasts, but you mainly focused on what he's doing with ESPN and Omaha Productions. So when it comes to both of them, his appearance on the Pat McAfee show on Monday and his role on the Manning cast on Monday Night Football, what were your big takeaways here?
Yeah, look, I think you would assume, right, that the Pat McAfee show is about the best environment for anybody to be their best. I know that might run counter to how people view that show, but as far as guests go, McAfee is an expert at making people feel comfortable. He is a nerd on the side of football, so if you know the NFL, college football, whatever, and you're comfortable, which he's going to make you, you're going to be great in that environment. And Belichick was, but I mean, right? Just ask Nick Saban, who's already glowing about how easy McAfee's making his new role on College Game Day for any evidence that you might need there. But I actually think Belichick was even better on the Manning cast. I feel like the being able to talk over a game, being able to have the Mannings there rather than, McAfee, who obviously played in the league but is a little bit more of a fan. He kind of comes at it from that perspective. I think that really worked for Belichick. However, they talked over each other about as many times as Belichick has media roles this season, right? So it was genuinely just like physically difficult to listen to. You couldn't hear what they were trying to say because of whether, I don't know if it's, Belichick needs to upgrade the Wi-Fi service plan he has at his house or something, but it was even worse than it normally is with any of the other guests, and they need to figure that out. If they can, and assuming that they just kind of get more comfortable, maybe it's more question and answer rather than just talking when you have a thought pop in your head or whatever. There's workarounds. I think that it's going to be really, really good. And they gave him the space. I mean, he has basically the whole first half after kind of a first little intro from Peyton and Eli to talk and set the stage for what each team's trying to do and everything else. And he had the right mix of deep dive stuff, but also just kind of what I was talking about with Brady. At one point, he just started saying Wilson, Wilson, Wilson about, Garrett Wilson on the Jets because the Niners were just leaving him open consistently, single covering him. And it's like, yeah, sometimes it's that simple. And a coach who's just able to cut through it and be like, yeah, you at home, you're wondering why the hell they can't guard Garrett Wilson. Me too, and I thought it was a really good watch.
Yeah, to McAfee, I think that one reason why all of us have such high expectations for Bill Belichick as a media figure is because he did so well during the draft spectacular with Pat McAfee. And I think maybe it's been glossed over how much of a role Pat actually played in that because Pat was setting him up and putting him in good spots. And so like I think the weekly interview is going to be what it is. Like I think it's going to be good. I don't know how many headlines it's going to generate, but I think like if you're a football fan, if you're remotely interested in any of this stuff, like that's going to be a weekly must watch. I'm with you on the Manning cast. Obviously, they have to figure out the tech issues, and I think when you consider the entities involved, like I would imagine that will be fixed very quickly and cleaned up by next week. But I'm somebody who goes into the Manning cast. I am not a big fan of simulcasts. They are just not for me. I understand the appeal of them, but the Manning cast specifically is just like a little too cute for me, especially with the celebrity guests that they have. It's a lot of, Peyton Manning telling dad jokes and like, we get it. You guys are brothers and make fun of each other, and you both happen to win like 4 Super Bowls combined. So like I get all that. But having said all that, I thought Belichick was like the perfect complement to Peyton and Eli, especially because he has so much shared history with both of them. I mean, he was legitimately one of the chief rivals of both Peyton and Eli Manning. And so they always have that crutch that they can fall back on. Like they showed that on Monday night. They just randomly showed a clip of, I think, Peyton running on a bootleg, which you never see Peyton Manning do, and like Bill Belichick reacting to it. It was against the Patriots and Eli chiming in, and it was great. And I think my issue with the Manning cast is it's too much going on for me when I want to watch the game. And for me, when it comes to having the Mannings with Bill Belichick, like I can watch the game and just listen to them as football guys, quote unquote football guys, without like having to worry about like, oh, Adam Sandler's trying to tell this joke and like are these two really meshing in terms of their senses of humor? Like as a football fan, like I just thought those three complemented each other in a way that I don't think I've seen from the Manning cast. What is this, year 3 now? I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, very small side note, but alt casts without it makes you realize how much you rely on the crowd noise while watching a game to have your attention peak. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Where you're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that was a big play." And without some of that, if you're not like locked in watching, which, it's 2024, we all have a phone and everything, like you're not always, it is very disorienting. But I agree, like of all alt casts, even if probably most people would agree it's a little bit of a worse experience. Maybe this is the best one, but it's still not quite as good. Especially on ESPN. Look, you're turning off Buck and Aikman. Like that's a
Right.
that's a great it's a great booth to not watch just to watch this. But all that aside, I think that Belichick and Peyton in particular they do a good job of, yeah, no crowd noise, a little bit of a different experience, but they're so on top of what matters and what should be happening. Frankly, it's like they'll tell you something that was like a 2 yard, 2nd and 1 first down execution is just as big as the thing the crowd's going to yell about when there's a touchdown. Like they give you like 3 times as many quote unquote big plays to care about. So I just think that they were two peas in a pod. Obviously the funny stuff like you were talking about, but just as far as like what I think Peyton, especially the ethos of what he kind of wants that show to be, Belichick seems to fit right into it. So I think it'll be good. I think that the McAfee thing, they almost probably leaned a little bit too much into the, all right, coach, what would you think and do in
Yeah.
this? It's just kind of like again, I think I said it about somebody as we were talking in the past. I just don't like, oh, it was Mark Schlereth when we were talking about breakfast ball. It's like that's a little bit played out though. Like put us in the mindset of they're all around. We don't need that, but just let him talk and we'll learn a lot. So yeah, I still think that that very conveniently timed article, Ben, about how he is waiting for the right opportunity solidifies that we might not get year 2 of Monday Night Football with Peyton, Eli, and Bill.
Yeah, or his show at Underdog, or his show at the 33rd Team, or him on Inside the NFL. Do we have a deal with him? Like, is he gonna do a weekly feature
It's
on
in the
awful
works.
announcing? Like,
Yeah,
how
it's in the
we're like
works.
the only outlet.
We were actually paid to talk about him right now. That's what this is. I
Okay.
didn't tell you. We'll throw the logo up of his media company on the corner when in post.
I do though, in all seriousness, like it is a little bit of oversaturation. Like it is like I kind of wish we only had the McAfee interview and Monday Night Football to look forward to, and maybe not to take anything away from any of the other outlets, but it's just a lot of Bill Belichick. And like that to me, at least with Tom Brady, we know he's calling one game a week. If you're interested in hearing what Tom Brady has to say, other than the occasional appearance on Colin Cowherd, like you're going to tune into Fox's Game of the Week. With Bill Belichick, it's like I can get him on demand now, like any day of the week. I don't know how much overlap there's going to be in terms of the analysis he's giving. There's only so much you can say. It does seem like he's kind of trying to take a different approach, with the coach show and, formulating it to where he's coaching his own team and that's how he's approaching it. But I don't know. It's just a lot of Bill Belichick. And I kind of think, especially considering we only think we're only going to be getting 1 year of this moving forward. I think maybe less would be more.
Yeah, that's totally fair. All right, you want to run through some highlights and lowlights from some others, some new faces, new network, maybe new teammates. We have quite a few others that made that debut, and probably the most high profile was Jason Kelce, who obviously replaced Robert Griffin III on Monday Night Countdown. He made his kind of official entry into more traditional sports media on top of the New Heights podcast that he just signed a massive new deal for at Amazon with his brother Travis. I thought Jason Kelce was a natural fit on this show, Ben, and it didn't surprise me one bit that he was fun, smart, loose. I mean, I could just see him being on that show and more for the next 20 years. And, he'll be the guy where like, all right, when are they going to move on from Jason Kelce? Like it's exactly what he needed to be.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier Tom Brady has his job because of his resume. I think that you could say the same certainly about Bill Belichick, regardless of what you think about either of them as analysts. Like they are in those roles because they've won a gajillion Super Bowls. Jason Kelce, which is funny because he has an incredible resume. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He won a Super Bowl. But he's not in this role because of his resume. He's in this role because of his personality and what he's been able to showcase, really since the Eagles won the Super Bowl, but especially in the last few years since him and Travis started the podcast. And that's the best of both worlds. When you have a guy who has the resume and when you have a guy who can be the personality and be the analyst, that's what makes Charles Barkley so great. Is Charles Barkley is that Hall of Fame power forward who also has the best personality, on air, in terms of NBA analysts. And I think Jason Kelce like has a real chance to become football's version of that. So yeah, it's not surprising to me at all that he was a natural fit. I think you could have watched that Monday Night Countdown broadcast and you could have thought he was doing this for 20 years now. I almost wonder if the platform is too small for him. I feel like of these three guys that, I've compared this year's NFL media free agency class to the 2010 NBA free agency class with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. And I think that, I think that Jason Kelce wound up with maybe the smallest platform of the other two big three in this with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. I almost wonder if we'll see
Maybe
him
it's
get.
more like that summer when what did Carlos Boozer went to the Bulls? Maybe
I
it's
think that
kind of
was the
like
same
that.
summer. I think that was
Yeah,
the
yeah,
same
that's what
summer.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's like he's not even on the big three level compared to those two. He's almost like the other guy who kind of had to settle for the other place, you know?
Yeah, and I think that it's just I think he could do anything in NFL media. I think he could be the centerpiece of a Sunday morning show. I think he could be in the booth. I think he could have his own simulcast, which I think ultimately once Travis retires might be the end game here. So I'm not surprised at all. I think one thing that stood out is there was obviously a viral clip about his shirt not fitting. I think that's what ESPN is looking for here. I think they're looking for one viral clip that Travis Kelce can retweet to his millions of followers, if it's not billions by now. And I think that we'll see one of those each week. But in terms of him being a football analyst, like I think he lived up to the hype and then some.
Agreed 100%. I feel that way about a lot of people. I think that the NFL media, sports media, they overstuff everything about their broadcasts of this league, which I get. There's 53 players on every roster. The league's been around and very, very popular for a very long time. Once people get jobs, they don't really want to leave them. I understand supply and demand here, but we all talk like with, inside the NBA, which we've been covering at Awful Announcing a ton for this past year as the Warner Brothers Discovery deal with the NBA collapsed and whatnot, of like, is it possible to recreate that show? Could it be the same on another network? Why has no one else tried to mimic it? Or why does everybody fail to mimic it? And all that stuff kind of on the NBA side. I wonder the same thing on the NFL side. All these shows are on for hours every Sunday morning, and yet sometimes they can feel so congested. And I get it's commercials and everything else, but I don't know if Monday Night Countdown necessarily qualifies for that. But Kelce just has the type of personality that is very much more in that Barkley Shaq mold than I'm going to come and deliver my 2-minute hit on how the center pulled for this big run, even though he can do that too. I don't know. Maybe we're headed toward, as these podcasts kind of grow and get these people some shine before they ever even step foot in a place like ESPN, maybe we're going to see a little bit of an evolution of the format of these shows. I think we all would hope so, considering those podcasts are much more popular than these shows in 2024. But it's, yeah, I had the same feeling. Like, he's kind of bursting out of this show. Can we find another way to get him out there in a format that's even better for him? And frankly, like, yeah, Marcus Spears is great. Ryan Clark, honestly, you could say a lot of those same things about him,
Yep.
but I want more. That's kind of it. That takes me to the CBS morning show, which was I had on because the Cardinals were playing the Bills and lost on Sunday morning, and I just figured, hey, Matt Ryan, JJ Watt. Watt was on it last year. He kind of moved into a more an even bigger role over time there, and then Matt Ryan debuting. And I have this impression, and I think I've made that clear as we've talked about this stuff for a few weeks on the play-by-play here now, of like, these shows is very old and stuffy. And between Nate Burleson, Matt Ryan, and JJ Watt, it's just Bill Cowher who's left of kind of the old guard of that show, which it is a little funny to watch it at times. But I guess a little bit of credit to CBS for mixing it up, bringing some younger, more vibrant voices in there, and they were sitting at recliners at one point, or like a little kind of like living room setup, and they were it just felt a little different. I don't know if it's going to be the next great thing and we're all going to be tuned into CBS every morning for the rest of time, but salute. They mixed it up, which is all we've been asking for years for those Fox and CBS shows.
Well, and CBS would have been the network if we did a draft of this. Like, you probably would have picked last of who would have like intentionally gotten younger. Like, this is the network that's known for like NCIS reruns. Like, this is not a network that caters to a younger audience. So the fact that they recognized that they had an issue in terms of, not being young enough, frankly,
Yep.
is a credit to them. So yeah, I'm with you there. I wasn't
When you
watching it. I
have
was
Terry Bradshaw talking about how Caleb Williams' nails are painted on the other channel, it's
man.
it's stark, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's gonna. It seems like the Terry Bradshaw stuff is really starting to catch on. I saw Boomer Esiason talking about him because he had never seen Terry Bradshaw stumble through highlights, and now he's become witness to that. But I wasn't watching CBS. I was actually watching ESPN Sunday
Yep.
morning. We can only watch so much at one time. But that was notable because you had the move from Sam Ponder to Mike Greenberg. And as you and I were kind of prepping for this show, I said, we don't really need to do a Greeny review. I know my Greeny review is going to be Greeny is Greeny. And Greeny was Greeny, but I will say, like, this move to Mike Greenberg paid off immediately because they had 4 major stories break. And that's not an exaggeration, especially when you factor in that one of them was the Tyreek Hill situation, which totally came out of nowhere and obviously is a very sensitive and nuanced issue. Mike Greenberg quarterbacked his way through all of that with Jeff Darlington, ironically, considering his role in the Scotty Scheffler arrest as his go-to on the ground in Miami. And that was not an easy situation. And I thought, I can't speak for the other networks, but I thought ESPN covered all of that masterfully and really became the go-to destination for what became the biggest, at least mainstream story of week 1 of the NFL season.
Yeah, I think the FBI or somebody's going to give Darlington a job as like an investigator at some point, given his knack for being right where he needs to be. But yeah, Greenberg was uh, the right man for that job, and you're absolutely right. I had that one on a little bit as well during like when the Dak thing came out and
Mhm.
whatnot before I think the Tyreek news had hit and everything else. And that takes talent. That takes reps to be able to jump around and then still kind of buy time by setting up, a Ryan brother here and a Randy Moss there for some little chatter about whatever game for a moment before you jump back to Shefty and then you go to that city. Like it is a tough job in the first place, especially when there's breaking news. I will say that the other person I want to shout out is it goes back to Fox putting Brady in a bad position because Greg Olsen just continues to be amazing. And I will also just say though, that game was trash. Atlanta Pittsburgh, already feeling the effects of being in the number 2 booth, although Cleveland Dallas wasn't great either. But Greg Olsen aside, the fact that Fox has Joe Davis as its number 2 announcer on the NFL also is just like an embarrassment of riches. That booth is going to be just as good as Brady Burkhardt all season, I think, if not better. And we're in good hands on Fox. We just turn on a game and we're bound to get something pretty great.
Yeah, you lucked out as a fan of an NFC team because NFC teams usually wind up on Fox.
Yeah, I thought I might get Brady because the Cardinals Rams game is the only Fox afternoon game, but they're putting him back on the Cowboys in a game that really will, I think, test Ben the effects of the viewership from the Brady bump. I'm not positive that anyone is going to be tuning in to Cowboys Saints just to hear Tom Brady, despite the 40-point whatever that Derek Carr was able to orchestrate there. I'm not sure the Saints are a draw, unfortunately, in 2024. But any other places you want to jump in the debut of the football broadcasting world before we get to our hot mics?
Yeah, well, let's take it back to Saturday real quick because there was some college football on too, and the biggest game of the week, at least in the primetime window, was Colorado versus Nebraska, which also marked Colt McCoy's debut quarterback you and I are both familiar with, you as a Cardinals fan, me as a Browns fan. I think we bookended his career kind of.
Yep.
But he made his debut in the NBC booth. We had a story about it on Awful Announcing. He did not receive rave reviews. It seemed like if you thought that people had the kids' gloves on with Tom Brady, they certainly did not for Colt McCoy. I think there were a lot of comparisons to Drew Brees just in terms of he didn't seem overly enthusiastic. He kind of seemed to be maybe not unprepared, but just really reacting in real time, which is a part of the job, but obviously not all of the job. And so I thought Colt McCoy, I thought that was a tough spot, and I think that kind of ties this all together. Speaking to our Tom Brady conversation, is like it's a tough job, and to just drop a quarterback in, regardless of their resume and regardless of how good they were as a interview subject, that's a tough transition to make. We saw Drew Brees go one and done, and Colt McCoy to make him the lead analyst for NBC, which because Fox now has the 12 o'clock big noon window, and CBS with the SEC kind of has that 3:30 window. Like the night game, the 8 p.m. Eastern game is usually going to be a big NBC Big Ten game. And I don't think Colt McCoy is ready for that job. And I think that it's going to be a really tough ask for him to be in that role. And it seems like there is going to be some flexibility, whether he's in the booth or in the studio. And I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the season, he's predominantly in the studio.
Yeah, well, I guess I assumed that he was getting that call for this week because of the Brazil NFL game, right? So won't it be Noah Eagle and Blackledge in the future for that game? I that's kind of what my assumption was, and he'll get
Yeah.
to handle maybe a less high profile matchup, so that should help him out. But yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, I thought it was funny. Dan Patrick had Colt McCoy on. Obviously, Patrick has the relationship with NBC on, his show streams there and kind of a distribution promotion deal. And then on Monday, he was ripping Colt McCoy, just kind of like like you are there. I'm like, well, it's called journalism, baby. Dan Patrick, you're getting the raw, uncut, real deal from him. He'll interview a guy, and 3 days later, he'll rip him if he doesn't do a good job. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it feels like my thought on that is just seeing the reactions was you mentioned Breeze, like NBC has just added so much sports to its slate lately with the Peacock exclusive NFL stuff, the Big Ten deals for every sport, um, expanding what the Olympics output is. They bought the tennis and everything, or they had tennis. I guess it's just it feels like a very young broadcasting crew right now across everywhere. Like it just feels like a kind of a new wave over there, and not all of them have worked, obviously. But that, as far as a macro kind of strategy thing, was surprising to me, or interesting that they're kind of dipping into new people as they expand all this. Obviously, the NBA is on the horizon. Maybe that means they're going to do that over there too, and kind of take chances. And I guess I can't hate on that, even if people don't seem to like Colt for right now.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned NBC, because one thing that did stand out to me over the weekend too is Sunday Night Football's broadcast, and their studio crew is Maria Taylor, Devin McCourty, Chris Sims, and Jason Garrett. And one, I think it's for like what's the most watched show each week. Like I really think that panel is lacking in star power. I really think they could have stood to add Jason Kelce. Like I think that would have been the home run hire for them. But what stands out about that studio crew is like that Jason Garrett's older than 50 years old, because the other three are in their early 40s or younger. So I don't know. I definitely, that was one of my takeaways from the weekend, was I think NBC really needs to boost the star power on Sunday night. And going back to Colt McCoy real quick. One thing that stood out to me about that is maybe it's just because college football is like so tribal. And so you just think about these former players and coaches and like what school they're tied to. Colt McCoy has no ties to the Big Ten. Like he played at Texas in the Big 12. Texas is now in the SEC. I don't know. It's just, he kind of just seems like a man on an island when it comes to being a Big Ten analyst, because he has no ties to the conference.
Yeah, you got to lean into it at a certain point. And if you're counting on any name recognition to carry you, it's better when the people tuning into the game are more likely to have that. So yeah, you would have guessed, I don't know, who's a Big Ten quarterback that they should have gotten
Chad
then as
Henne.
our there you go.
And
Go
I'm
get
saying
Chad
that as
Henne.
an
What are
Ohio
you doing?
State guy.
What are you doing? Yeah, all right. So ready to move to our hot mic? I'll let you kick us off here.
Yeah, so I was on vacation last week. That's why we didn't have a show. And I made like any good Ohioan, I made the 10 or so hour drive to South Carolina because we invade South Carolina, whether it's Hilton Head or Myrtle Beach for most of the summer. And on that drive on the way there and back, I listened to the audiobook version of the new Aaron Rodgers book, Out of the Darkness by Ian O'Connor. And I thought it was really, really good. I didn't know what to expect. It was the first Ian O'Connor sports biography I've read / listened to. I'm going to be listening to the Bill Belichick one here shortly because I just thought it was really good. It was really straightforward in terms of he talked to Aaron Rodgers for the book, but you didn't feel like he was being sympathetic to Aaron Rodgers. I didn't feel like he was being unnecessarily harsh to Aaron Rodgers. I thought it was a very like by the numbers, like this is who Aaron Rodgers is. This is why he is the way he is, and it leads it to the reader / listener to make their judgments on a lot of things about a really polarizing figure in sports. And it's also like very up to date. Like it goes all the way up to the RFK and Pat McAfee controversies, the Jimmy Kimmel controversy from earlier this year. So I thought it was a really good book. And I also thought like we're in such a weird place when it comes to content focused on specific athletes and how much say they have in the book and whether it's better to not get that athlete's input or whether it's better to let them control the message. And just listening to Ian O'Connor on the Dan Le Batard show and some other interviews he's done about the book, going through his interview process, he talked to like everybody from Aaron Rodgers' life. He talked to his family. He talked to his former coaches and teammates. And then he went to Aaron Rodgers. And it didn't seem like he got a interview with Aaron Rodgers, but it seemed like what he was able to do was run a bunch of stuff by Aaron Rodgers and let Aaron Rodgers say, yes, that's true, or no, that's not true. Or this is my perspective on that. And there were some moments where Ian O'Connor pushed back on Aaron Rodgers. There was a moment where Aaron Rodgers, in the midst of his feud with his family, didn't go to a wedding of a family friend he was scheduled to be the best man in, and reportedly didn't give that friend notice until the day of or the day before. It was very short notice. And Ian O'Connor pushed back on Aaron Rodgers, both in the interview and in the book, and told him why he thought that was a terrible thing to do. So I just thought, like, in this day and age where we have such little sports content about specific athletes and sports figures that feels like it's like independent, I thought this was a great example of something that still feels like true journalism.
I caught a lot of the media tour that Ian O'Connor went on, so I had a lot of familiarity with the book. And honestly, that was part of what made me not in a hurry to read it. You know, when you get too much, and I think I was convincing myself that I knew everything that there was to know. But your
Yeah.
recommendation makes me want to dive back in. But I was surprised though too because Rogers gave 2 interviews around the time that this book was being promoted, with Boomer and Geo on WFAN and with Pardon My Take. And in both cases, he was, you know, kind of prepping people to be skeptical about the truth of what O'Connor's reporting suggested. I think just to kind of, you know, protect his integrity a little bit, but he didn't go as hard on him as I think we all know Rogers could and would if he really thought it was all nonsense and terrible, right? Like O'Connor did seem to earn Aaron's respect a bit just in the way in the depth that he went to pull this book off. And I feel like by the time it seems like that he went back to Rogers, like you're saying, I feel like he just had so much information and it seems like the vast majority of it was very accurate that Rogers was like, I can't really be mad here. I mean, I'll try to say my piece as much as I can, but um, you kind of did a good job. What am I supposed to do? So I don't know. I guess my other question off of that though would be, how are you feeling about this Netflix documentary about Rogers? Do you feel like it'll tell us anything new? He seems to be involved, but not an executive producer. Through only
Yeah,
3 episodes? What do you think?
yeah, I don't have much interest in it. Just based on the trailer, it seems like it's gonna be like solely focused on his Achilles rehab, which I guess is interesting because he was doing so many crazy things to try to expedite the process and get back on the field last year. So like maybe that part of it will be interesting, but when you consider the entities involved, especially NFL Films, which you pointed out to me, like we're not going to get into the interesting stuff. We're not going to get into the off the field stuff. I think it's mainly going to be, Aaron Rodgers as this great football mind and Aaron Rodgers as this motivated spiritual individual who's trying to push the limits of science, which we already know the outcome. He didn't do it, even though he'll have you
Yeah.
believe that, if the Jets were still in the playoff hunt, he would have played. And I'm sure there will be something hinting that was the case. But it just,
Coming off
man,
of Monday Night Football where Tyrod Taylor came in during garbage time. So it's like they're still
exactly.
being careful. We all kind of know what he's still 40 and, a little bit hurt, but or coming off of it, they're being gentle. I guess as far as the documentary side of things, I just worry that, or not worry. I just hate that they're making so many of these that are also on such tiny subjects. Like you said, if this is truly just about his recovery, that's like a quarter of one episode of the Aaron Rodgers docuseries we get 10 years from now. It's
Right.
just like that would have been like a Sports Center segment. And it was. They did an interview with him this past weekend. It's just weird what counts as content in 2024 sometimes. 3 episodes on the recovery of a player who did not come back is just I'm not even hating on him or it. It's just kind of why. Like what who is it for? Why do we need to hear more about this?
Maybe because it was the most the newest stuff in Aaron Rodgers' life, but I thought that the stuff about the recovery and the injury was the least interesting part of Ian O'Connor's book. Like, and maybe I was just like, all right, let's get this drive over, let's finish this book. But I didn't find it all that interesting. It just
Gotcha.
it was less interesting than Aaron Rodgers thinks it is. I thought it's funny you mentioned like you didn't want to read the book because you felt like you had already heard everything in it. That's how I am with like most books. Books are in this weird place where they get published and then 2 excerpts get leaked and then like you already have all the interesting parts of it. To me, the best part of this book was being able to take a trip back down into early 2000s college football, mid 2010s NFL football, all the stuff at Cal. It's like, oh, I remember Ryan Grant. I remember Greg Jennings. All that stuff to me is like part of what makes reading a book like this really fun. The stuff about like him getting injured with the Jets and trying to force his way back, I just didn't find it wholly interesting. So to me, this docu-series is going to be more of the same.
If you needed the reintroduction to Greg Jennings, you clearly have not been watching enough First Things First on FS1. I get a
Clearly.
large dose of Greg Jennings every day here for Awful Announcing covering that show. But all right, my hot mic of the week before we wrap here. Several people now, including Andrew Marchand and John Oran of The Athletic and Puck, respectively, have agreed in their reporting that these equity discussions, largely between ESPN and the NFL, but also at one point rumored to be with the NBA, Ben, are basically off. And for a refresher on that, the idea was at the time, like early this year or so, that ESPN kind of needs a cash influx, or doesn't need, but would benefit from one as they're kind of reorienting their business around a streaming first future. And obviously, from an NFL standpoint, they did a bunch of layoffs and cuts. They moved Good Morning Football across the country. NFL media, as its own entity, is struggling a bit because, cable business, as we know, same reason ESPN is struggling. Something based on NFL Network is a little bit on life support here in the year 2024. And that ESPN would just take over NFL media. The NFL would inject a little bit of cash in ESPN. And we probably, as consumers of all this stuff, would just get a hell of a lot more NFL talk, even than we already are on the worldwide leaders' airwaves. And that seems to just be not happening anymore. And same with the NBA side of it, as far as we can tell from the latest reporting. I just have to admit, I was pretty surprised to see this. I thought that it made a ton of sense on both sides, frankly. And in a world where, kind of coming off that documentary conversation we were just having, so much of this stuff is co-produced and licensed from one thing to the next, and the sources and subjects are involved in the production of it. It just felt like a no-brainer that this was kind of the next chapter of where sports media would be headed. I'm sure there's a million reasons business-wise and financially that this just did not make sense. Maybe one side was asking for something different. You never really know. What did you think when you saw this news? And do you think there's a chance something like this maybe still comes together, or where does ESPN go next?
I'm actually I'm a little more interested in where like the NFL network goes, or NBA TV, which seems to be on life support with Turner being out of the picture. I wonder if we're at a point where there's not much use for league owned networks. Like it seemed like for the NFL, it was a place where they could put Thursday night football, and now they realize they can just sell Thursday night football. And the leagues are already such partners with their media partners because of the amount of money that has started to come into these deals. That I don't know, like, does the NFL need to have its own state media? Does the NBA need to have its own? I mean, the NBA's is almost non-existent, it feels like now, compared to the NFL. The NFL still has a fully functional cable channel, big personalities like Ian Rappaport and the Good Morning Football crew. The NFL is at least still like an entity. I don't know about the
Yeah.
NBA's. And so I wonder if like this is it for those leagues in terms of league owned networks, because I don't really see what the point of them are.
I think it is. I mean, I think they were so late to the game with that stuff in the first place. They started trying to grow their networks by the time, cable had been a dominant business strategy for big media companies for decades. And then they were like, hey, maybe we should get in on that, and then it was almost too late by the time they even started. I mean, how long was Thursday Night Football exclusive to NFL Network? I mean, it couldn't have been 10 years, right? Was it? I mean, so I think my assumption has long been that those things are going to die off. But how is a fascinating question. They're still putting out content. I mean, Chris Russo's on MLB Network, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think it's not as if these things have no interesting shows or content, and there are diehard fans who want that stuff, and it still can be good and diligent coverage of leagues that, maybe not the NBA and NFL, but others that don't get a lot of it. So I don't know. I'm curious to see kind of where that side of it goes. I guess the ESPN part of this, to me, my guess, it sounds like they may still explore some tech partnerships, which was another offshoot of the initial reporting when they were kind of scouring the marketplace for these types of deals. It feels like something with Apple has to make a lot of sense here. That
Hmm.
maybe that's how Apple kind of dives into this from the side door, is just to, I don't know if you like, I have an Apple Watch. I get
Hmm.
100 notifications a day about where stuff's going to be airing and what the score is and this and that, both from the ESPN app as well as it telling me to go turn on my Apple TV in the living room and watch something. And obviously, they kind of want content that can live in a lot of places between highlights and news and actual games. ESPN feels like a perfect match. That'd be my best guess, because so many of these other tech companies are now just competitors with ESPN. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to partner with Amazon. Amazon's kind of the enemy now. So Apple would be, I guess, maybe where they go next.
Yeah, they definitely loom large in all of this, especially because they've been left out of both the NFL's and the NBA's last two media rights deals, which are now locked up for the long term. In terms of though, had this partnership come to fruition, like it seems like there was this idea that like this is the end of sports journalism because we're not even going to have the facade of ESPN being an independent entity from the NFL and from the NBA. And to me, like those lines have always been blurred. And so I guess like this would just be this would just be making it official. But I don't know. Where did you stand on all of that?
I understood the fear. I obviously can't predict the future and the direct influence where, the NFL is like at a Disney board meeting or something. It gets a little bit hairy. But to me, the NFL is already a pretty significant informal stakeholder in ESPN, given, you know, the way
What
in
they
which they partner on so many things. And I mean, like, I guess to me, the best way that it made sense to me from an ESPN standpoint with all of this is like they got to worry about, these quarterback and receiver shows that Netflix is doing. And they almost, who cares about that? Like they got to just cling on
Yeah.
to the relationship they already had with the NFL, let alone whatever the kind of next layers of that would be. So I agree with you. It wouldn't have been a monumental change. I just think it felt a little taboo to the, old guard of sports journalism, and rightly so. I guess those boundaries just broke down a long time ago. This wouldn't have changed much.
Yeah, the E in ESPN stands for entertainment. Don't ever forget that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of hard-hitting journalism happening on ESPN about any sport in 2024, so, that ship just feels like it sailed already. But that will wrap us up for the week. Thank you for listening to the play-by-play. Don't forget to hit follow or subscribe wherever you're finding us. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, whatever audio platform you love. Visit awfulannouncing.com. We have content going up there constantly. I mean, daily doesn't even do it justice. Enjoy your sports. Until the next time, we'll see you next week.